Today we are going to talk about how to turn coursebook exercises into games. Many years ago, when I was a student at Nile on the course for material writers, I was asked by my tutors, what is a coursebook for you? And we all had very different answers to these questions. It's a compass, a straitjacket, a springboard, a crutch, a supermarket, a holy book, a survival kit, a recipe. But none of us said that we are ready to work without a coursebook. As an English teacher, I need the coursebook to help me to follow the curriculum and to show me some guideline. If you ask the same question your students, what is a coursebook for you? Do you like coursebook? They would say that they hate coursebook. I know that I'm right. I asked my students in my language school, more than 100 teenage students said that they don't want to see a coursebook in their lessons because they find them very boring. For them, a coursebook is equal to school, and school is boring. And when they come to my lessons in a language school, they want them to be much more different from traditional lessons. So what can I do as a teacher to disguise these coursebook exercises and to make them more appealing to my students? Let's see what we can do. If we have a look at a very traditional coursebook unit, we will see that in any coursebook, so the structure is more or less the same. Yeah, we have the first exercise, which is something like match a word and a picture. Then we have something like listen and repeat. And in some coursebooks, we might have an exercise listen and point. Then we have a series of gap-filling exercises. And in the end, we have something like ask your partner the questions using the target language or make true sentences about yourself. And of course, if you start doing these exercises from a coursebook one by one, your students won't be very happy with the lesson like this. So what can we do to teach by a coursebook, but to pretend that we just play games and do different interactive activities? I'm sure that as a teacher, you are aware of a number of different game-like activities, and you know all the games you need for every exercise in your coursebook. But you have to stop and to think carefully. So which game can be used instead of which exercise? So what about match a word and a picture? What game comes to our mind? Think about it. And I'm sure you will come up with this answer. It's a memory game. Because what do we do in memory game? We open two cards, and you can have a word card on one piece of paper and a flashcard on another piece of paper. And if they match, you get a winning point. Of course, you don't know these words at this moment, and it's more like a random activity. But still, it is much more interesting than just doing an exercise from the coursebook. Or as an alternative, I play voting games sometimes. I prepare a set of word cards for each of my students, and then I start showing them the flashcards with new language, and they try to guess which word can match the flashcard which I show. And if they match, so they get a reward, a point, for example. Okay, the next type of exercises, listen and point. And of course, this is bingo. Because what is the core mechanics in bingo? You listen to your teacher saying some words, and then you find this word on your bingo card and cross it out. It is listen and point activity. And of course, if you play bingo, you are much more engaged into the process than just listening to the audio and pointing to the pictures in the coursebook. Okay, and Sometimes I want to spice up this activity and I turn it into a little bit like gambling activity. I ask my students to donate one of their points to the pot, and then the person who wins in the first round, for example, he gets all the points. So that's much more engaging, actually. So the next type of activity, the next exercise in your course book is listen and repeat. So what can we do at this point? We can play a flashcard game, which is quite popular, and I think that many teachers are familiar with it. Clever Parrots. You show flashcards to your students and you start saying words. So sometimes what you show and what you say, these two things don't match. For example, you show a coat and you say a jacket. So if you show a coat and say a jacket, students don't say anything. But if you show a coat and say a coat, they must repeat after you. So you see, this is just an exercise, listen and repeat. But when it is turned into an interactive activity, into a game-like activity, your students find it much more useful and much more interesting. Okay. What about making true sentences about yourself? So what kind of activities we can do instead of just sitting in pairs and talking? And sometimes teenage students, they just hate this type of activity. So we can play basketball. You put the flashcards on the floor with target language and you put a basket at the end of this line. Then our students start walking along this line, making true sentences with active vocabulary. If they make a mistake, they must stop and throw the ball into the basket from this point. They might miss and don't get a score, or they might score. So it depends. But of course, the chances to score a ball are much higher if they don't make any mistakes and come very close to the basket. What I like about this activity is that other students, they just listen very carefully, very attentively, and they try to memorize the words which they don't know. Okay, if you work online, you can use lava game instead of this activity. You can see it on the slide. So I just have a picture of lava and I put sticky notes across this lava, and my students, they have to jump from one word to another, and if they make a mistake, they fall down into lava and they have to start once again. When you get to the end of this bridge, of this crossing, you get a point. And so my students find it very entertaining. And instead of different counters, I can just make screenshots of my students and just to add some personal touch to the game. And now let's talk about exercises which are very difficult. Especially for teenage students. Teenage students don't really like doing them. Make true sentences about yourself, or ask your partner questions using target vocabulary. So how can we transform this type of activity, this exercise, into an interesting activity? Do your students love speaking on different topics? Do they like discussing environment? Do they like discussing sport? Do they like discussing education? There are some topics which students find very difficult to discuss. First of all, because they don't like the topic, and then they might lack of the ideas, and they don't think that they have enough experience to talk about this or that topic. So what can we do? So the first stage, let your students choose the question they want to discuss. If you have a set of questions in this discussion section in your course book, you can ask your students to vote for the question which they find more appealing and more interesting for them to discuss. You can use dot voting technique from facilitation activities. You can put all these questions on sticky notes and then give your students maybe just a marker and ask them to put a tick or a dot next to the question which he or she wants to discuss. And then you just count how many points there are, and the question which has got more points, more dots than any other questions is the first to start discussion with. That means that this is the question which most of your students find interesting to talk about. And on the other hand, it gives your students this feeling of confidence and this feeling that, okay, I mean something in this room. And it's not the teacher who tells me what to do, but I can choose what I want to do for myself and I can influence the lesson. Okay, another problem with discussion question is that students don't know what to talk about. They don't have ideas. How can we make them brainstorm these ideas? Everybody knows about spider diagrams and mind maps, and I think many of you use them in the classroom. But it is very difficult to think in terms of words, and it is much easier for our brain to think with images. So let's turn this spider diagram into a picture spider diagram. Give each student a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, and ask them to draw a bubble in the center and write the topic of your discussion. For example, balanced diet. That's the question which is I find very difficult to discuss with my teenage students because they think McDonald's, well, it's quite balanced for them. So because they don't have these problems with diets. Okay, so then you draw lines coming from this bubble. The number of lines must be equal to the number of students in your group. And then you draw what comes to your mind when you hear balanced diet. Okay, for example, what comes to my mind? Fruit. I draw an apple. Then I pass this piece of paper to the person on my left, and I get a piece of paper from my groupmate from the right. And I have to draw something else. I can't draw the apple, which was on the previous piece of paper. I have to come with something new. Okay, I can draw a bottle of water, for example, because I think, okay, this is what a healthy diet is. But if the paper which I got from my colleague, from my groupmate contains this bottle, has the bottle, I can't draw it. I have to think again and again. And this is what real brainstorm is. And of course, when our brainstorm is over and we have got all these pictures on this piece of paper, it is very interesting to have a look at these posters and we start discussing, what's this picture about? Why did you draw it? And this is a real, vivid, and bright discussion.